Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm excited to have you here with us, joining us today. Our topic today is SDM, the fundamentals of software delivery management. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'll serve as your host and moderator for the webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping items here. We're going to record or are recording the webinar, and we will send a link to the recording and to the slides from today's webinar. Everyone that's attending will get an email with links to those. We also have an ebook that we're sending out. In a separate email, when that ebook is ready, we will send out a link to that as well. So there's some really good content there also. Of course, our speakers, and I'll be introducing them in just a moment, love questions. So please enter your questions in the questions tab on the GoToWebinar software, and we'll be happy to entertain those questions. So let's move on to our topic, SDM, fundamentals of software delivery management. It's my pleasure to introduce your speakers for today. First, I'd like to introduce to you Jay Lyman, who's Principal Analyst with 451 Research. Jay?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Mitchell. I am an analyst with 451 Research. I work on our applied infrastructure and DevOps team, and that's one key area of focus is DevOps. I also look into cloud native, hybrid cloud, and looking forward to presenting with folks today.
Excellent, fantastic having you on. Also like to introduce Brian Dawson. He's DevOps Analyst, or excuse me, and DevOps Evangelist as well as probably Analyst too, right, Brian? With CloudBees. Say hello.
Hello, thanks, Mitch. Yeah, I'm going to take Jay's job. Jay, watch out. No, yeah, I'm a DevOps Evangelist with CloudBees, also a member of our product marketing team with a focus on our suite marketing, and alongside Mike, who you'll meet here, helping cover our software delivery management category. Thank you.
Excellent. And I'd also like to introduce Michael Baldani, who's Senior Product Marketing Manager with CloudBees. Michael, say hello.
Thanks, Mitch. Hello, everybody. Glad to be here today. I am the Product Marketing Manager for the CloudBees solution for SDM, which you'll hear about later on in this presentation. Glad to be here. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us today. Now, just so you know, I may pull a moderator last-minute call here. If it's not active enough, we'll do a voting poll at the end to see who's the top analyst on the webinar. So keep your games active.
All right.
Okay. So let's talk about what we're going to be discussing today. DevOps, I think we all know, has fundamentally changed how we develop software, and in many ways, not just the technology, but also how organizations work, barriers being broken down, job descriptions starting to be redefined, maybe not even relevant sometimes, and of course, teams are much, much more collaborative. There's a lot more to it, though, also. In addition to that, we have to think about how we deliver high-quality software at high velocity. So we need to think about things like the interplay of DevOps and software delivery management that are driving our digital transformation. So other topics like shareholders that are beyond the IT and ops organizations, the role of security, of governance, how do we measure the success of DevOps? Kind of thinking about how we do the work that we do. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So I'd like to turn it over to Jay, who's going to be our first speaker. And of course, the three of us will be interjecting now and again. Jay, take it away.
Thank you, Mitchell. Yeah, just to sort of set the table here a little bit, I'll go over some data points. And I wanted to go over the survey that I'm going to be referring to, which is our inaugural, this is our first year that we've done this 451 Voice of the Enterprise survey. And that's sort of our audience of enterprise IT decision makers. We did the first survey of this in February and March of this year. It was a survey of 500 IT leaders, including enterprise IT buyers, but we also included practitioners, which includes software developers, IT architects, SREs, and other roles of those folks in the trenches. This was across verticals. We polled individuals in North America. And again, we're sort of looking forward to tracking some of these things over time. But this is the source of the data that I'm going to be going through. And let's take a look at this first one, which is asking about, which additional stakeholders beyond developers in IT operations are primary or critical to enterprise DevOps. And we see at the top here security. We'll discuss security and DevOps more in a bit here, but this has been a consistent finding from previous custom surveys that we've done, and is typically security is one of the key stakeholders that's brought into DevOps process, and we expect that to continue. This is sort of just evidence of the secure DevOps or DevSecOps trend really underway in the industry. When we look
Jay,
at the next,
can I ask you a question about your sample here? Is this sort of an opt-in of a survey about DevOps sent to DevOps people, or is this the normal kind of population that you
we asked DevOps savvy organizations, if you will. So this is a specific DevOps audience within enterprise IT.
Great.
These are organizations that are at a full or some adoption of DevOps, typically.
Perfect.
And we see the other. Oh yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I'm sorry. Were you staying on the slide or getting ready to move forward?
Oh, I just had a couple more things on this one.
Okay, excellent.
Just about the central IT admin stakeholder. I think this is indicative that organizations want to make sure their DevOps implementations are blessed, are sanctioned by the organization, while they're also balancing flexibility for their developers and IT ops teams so they can use what they want. We also see data science and data analytics teams, and that's consistent with what we see as the top DevOps type of application that's released. That was a data analytics applications. And then DBAs, who I've been saying this a lot lately, but they're now getting pulled into DevOps processes. I think DBAs were notoriously left out of DevOps processes up until recent years, and certainly when the trend began. And then finally, the management and leadership and the lines of business managers, indicative of more top-down adoption of DevOps. It's certainly no longer limited to a grassroots developers driven trend.
Awesome. Jay, I find a couple of things really interesting on there that I was hoping to get your insights on. One is, it's interesting. I noticed that it's great to see that DBAs are rising in the upper 50% as key stakeholders. But what do you think about the fact that it looks like financial services is about 50% behind or lagging significantly behind the other industries?
Well, I think that might have to do with, there was a connection between certain industries and additional stakeholders. Manufacturing was most likely to rate security and central IT admins as primary additional stakeholders. Business services were more likely to identify management and leadership as the primary additional stakeholder. Healthcare organizations were more likely to call out compliance professionals and teams as primary DevOps stakeholders. So I think when it comes to financial services, they're dealing with a lot of compliance and regulatory issues. And sometimes that can prevent organizations from spreading their DevOps across more teams and organizations. And it's a legitimate concern for enterprises because those compliance and regulatory requirements, may be onerous for certain teams. So I think that might be part of that.
Yeah, and I have a suspicion that it's a little bit harder to move key systems of records in finance over. So while we can apply DevOps to systems of reference as well as systems of record, I think in my experience, and I don't know, Mitchell and Jay, if you agree, the lift is a little bit harder when you're dealing with massive traditional databases and systems that are at the core of your business.
That's right, and security and compliance are pretty key for those financial services insurance organizations. So yeah, I would agree.
I think there's a certain amount of data folks like to talk about gravity of data too, and massive large databases and processes and systems built around it, like financial transactions, like healthcare. I think that's going to have different characteristics of organizations, maybe a more of an internet tech company, for example. You got to think about how they approach DevOps slightly differently, maybe fundamentally differently.
Yeah. Awesome, thanks. And the point too that I just wanted to call out, and I think we'll drill into more later, Jay, is as you called out, it's encouraging that management and leadership, lines of business managers are registering. I do think it's a signal of a place where we need to improve in that neither of those hit above 29%. It would seem like for successful enterprise-wide DevOps transformations and software delivery, we'd want to see those rise to the top. And Mike and I will talk a bit about that as we go into SDM.
Yep. And we are tracking this over time, and we're likely to see as DevOps broadens beyond pockets and initial deployments and more broadly across the organization. I think you're likely to see that management and leadership category move up. But we'll let the future data speak for itself.
I want to throw in one more point, not to belabor, get off our first slide. I work a lot with companies like CloudBees and others in the suppliers, if you will, to customers implementing DevOps. There's a lot of attention being paid to this right now because they're having to sell to more than just the IT operations infrastructure teams, to the dev teams. They're very interested in getting out to C-suite, to the business units, to people that are driving the business functionality behind it, that are making some of the buying decisions that weren't involved in that 5+ years ago. So important note about the stakeholders. It's important to the vendor community as well as folks implementing DevOps.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide, and we can dig into security just a little bit. I think this sort of highlights a few things. One, a change in thinking about security with DevOps, which now is increasingly seen as enhanced by DevOps rather than just slowing down DevOps processes. And there's a few things that have changed in that. One, software developers, I think, are more into security when it's tied to software quality. That's sort of the language that they can speak when we're talking about software quality, and it is tied to security. The security vendors are making sure that their tools are more integrated and automated. So it's easier to slot security into your DevOps workflows. And then we have the high-profile incidents and breaches. And every time an organization gets a black eye from a security outbreak, everybody else in the industry is looking at their workflows, including DevOps ones, and saying we need to reduce our risk. We need to be aware of what's going into our code. And that's reflected, I think, in some of these security elements that are enhanced from DevOps. We also have in the sidebar at the top there, sort of a glass half empty, half full in terms of how many DevOps workflows include any security elements at all. And so we're about at half of organizations, including that security tooling. And I think based on the factors that I discussed, we're going to see that go up over time. So let's take a look at the next slide. And this is really critical, measuring and improving DevOps success. I think showing what you can do with DevOps has always been an important part of the trend, and moving it beyond the champions to broader organizational deployment. And typically we see organizations focused on speed, efficiency, competitive advantage, responsiveness. And here we see what they're using to sort of measure that. And these make sense. And I think these are used for both internal DevOps implementations, where you're better serving developers and IT ops teams and making them work better, and also those external facing applications that are released with DevOps. And our data shows that organizations are using DevOps for both. I think typically they perfect their DevOps implementation internally and then push it out to customers. But you can see that those business level metrics are a close second to the quality metrics. And this is also where we see some connection between the lines of business, the business units, and DevOps, and the business benefits of DevOps, which is becoming increasingly important. And it's beyond just speed now. And we're seeing that businesses really want to know what's the effect of DevOps on our product, on our customers, and their experiences. So all of these sort of figure into value stream management, I think. And that's another area where we see organizations really applying some of the data that they can collect, whether it's on performance for the application or the infrastructure, or how the customers are reacting to their new products and features. But these are what we see organizations using sort of prove and then expand their DevOps implementations. You know, I think this, we've done some discussion of this. This jibes pretty much with what you folks see out there, but I'd love to hear, you know, any thoughts or questions on this part of it.
Well, one thing I'd like to jump in with on this, Jay, is you know, the business part of the organization, business community have embraced DevOps in their own way because they see this as a potential for increasing velocity, going after new businesses, new markets, you know, introducing products, updates quicker. So one of the things I would encourage us to think about is not think of measuring DevOps success just in traditional IT metrics. How many releases do we get out, the defect rates, et cetera.
Yeah.
But think about that second item and how you expand that to increased revenue, increased velocity of the business, maybe defensiveness against other disruptive. How do you not be the next victim of whatever, the new, you know, Airbnb or whoever the next technology company to come into your market. So the folks that are providing the funding for us to do these things are looking at other metrics and how can we tie these measurements to what the business is looking at too.
Yep.
Oh, Brian, we're not getting you there. I think you're on.
Absolutely, Mitchell. Big thumbs up on the focus on the business metrics. I still do actually in the field run into an increasing number of practitioners that are recognizing the value of tying kind of the technical outcomes to business results. But a number of those are still struggling with figuring out how to do it, right? And I do think that I'm encouraged by seeing the 41%. And I'm convinced it's a place we need to continue to improve. I also spend a lot of time talking about culture. I'm running into a number of people that have, you know, in summary said, look, we've nailed down the automation. We have our tools integrated. Now, one of our biggest inhibitors is culture, is unlocking, is bringing people in, getting people invested, and implementing a culture that allows us to move fast. Where I'm also encouraged in the overall data, Jay and Mitchell, is that while frequency of release is an important metric, and again, you'll hear us as CloudBees talk about that it is ranking lower than things like quality metrics, business level metrics. So one of the concerns is that frequency of release or release frequency begins to be treated like an outcome metric. But I think we know from the days of lines of code, right? That it can be misused. It's a leading indicator, but we need to be careful not to say, okay, we can deploy faster. We're doing what we need to do and stop short of measuring quality, value, business impact.
Yep.
Ditto on that.
Yeah, good point. And all of this sort of is reflective that we're moving away from the idea that IT operations, central IT, is just a cost loss center, and we're moving away from TCO and we're getting closer to ROI. And I think these metrics sort of bear that out. And agreed, we see frequency of releases here at the bottom. So agree with you, Brian, that's becoming, it's not just about speed anymore, is the bottom line. And certainly it is still about speed. And as we move to the next slide, it may not be as useful for measuring and improving success. We are seeing a faster pace of software releases, and this is something where it's interesting to look at this across industries, across size of organization. But basically, you know, our survey highlights how weekly, daily, and hourly releases now outnumber monthly and quarterly releases, and that's a far cry from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe even a few years ago, when monthly and quarterly releases were the norm. And so that's a big change, I think. And we also found that larger organizations with 1,000 or more employees were less likely than the smaller companies to have weekly, daily, or hourly releases. And this is indicative, I think, of the burden of existing and legacy applications, of a greater number of development and IT operations teams across the organization. So it can get more difficult as you scale up and get larger. But we see that those large organizations aren't very far behind the smaller organizations. In terms of verticals, we see financial services leading the way which isn't surprising. I think that's always a sort of a bleeding edge vertical. But these other verticals, including healthcare and manufacturing, they're not far behind either. And I think this is another part of DevOps that's happened with the evolution and the maturation of the trend, is we're really seeing it across all industries. When the trend started, it was really sort of those bleeding edge verticals, financial services, insurance, telecom. Those seem to be the companies most focused on DevOps. But we hear about it a lot in manufacturing. We hear about it in healthcare, certainly in IT, retail. There aren't many verticals that I'm aware of that don't have some DevOps leaders. And once one or two companies in a specific space start doing it, the other ones realize that they need to do it to keep up.
Jay, using financial services as kind of leading indicator, one thing just interesting, one data point in that is the 12% for monthly. So that's actually close to the hourly in terms of the shortest amount of releases or number of releases that there. This kind of goes from a big number of weekly to everything else is, at I guess quarterly. What do you think that is in the financial sector? Is that something we'd expect to see as you're going to do hourly, daily, weekly, and this kind of monthly is the smaller part of it, and then everything else happens quarterly?
Yeah, well, I think it's indicative that there's always going to be those vestiges of the organization that are still slow. And Brian referred to the culture, and when we ask, what are the biggest impediments, the biggest challenges for DevOps, a lot of it is just good old-fashioned enterprise IT inertia, right? Resistance to change, the feeling that the existing process is sufficient. So even those, bleeding edge financial services institutions that are well aware that they need to compete with newcomers, disruptors in their industry, they still have sort of that enterprise IT inertia baggage. So I think, it's reflective, but, I'll run into progressive companies across industries where I'll hear about, developers, DevOps teams waiting, 3 months for infrastructure and environments. So I think it's people are sometimes surprised to hear that there's supposedly progressive companies that are running containers in VMs on a 1-to-1 ratio. But that is their enterprise reality, right? That's how they've waded into containers, and that's pretty typical. They sometimes hit the same walls that they may have hit with VMs and that infrastructure. But for parts of the organization, change is slow.
One step at a time.
Yeah.
Hey, Jay, I'm curious, do you have any thoughts or feedback from the field on when frequent enough is enough? So for instance, we see financial services is at a point where it looks like over 60% of their app portfolio has been deployed in a week or less, or more frequently. Where do you think people should be looking to get? Is a week enough, or should everybody be striving to be the Facebook, Amazon, or Netflix of the world with hourly or thousands of deployments a day?
Right. Well, we asked a survey, I think a couple of years ago, and we had an on-demand option, and everybody seemed to choose that. So I think people want to talk about being as fast as possible, but really it's going to come down to the developers. Really this is about developer and team productivity, and how much are they waiting for and mucking around with manual labor on the infrastructure versus focusing on new features, new products, and innovation. So I really kind of think that's up to the devs and the DevOps teams to be moving at the velocity that they're most effective and productive. And for some organizations, that might be weekly, right? If you're moving from quarterly, anything is going to be an improvement on that, right? But I think to get those other vestiges to come along, and some applications, they might not require this. It's sort of like moving to microservices from monolithic applications. Not all applications are going to require that. Some applications can be maintained as a monolith. And so organizations, they sort of need to pick the right applications. But I really do think it comes down to the development teams, how onboarding and their productivity sort of drives the pace of software release.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.
And with that, I'll turn it over to Brian.
All right, I guess I'm up. Well, Jay, thank you for that data. I know you and I also had some time in a couple of sessions prior to go over it and for me to ask you questions. And I think the questions you guys are asking, the insights we get from it are awesome. I actually look forward to seeing it progress over years so we could start to measure trends. And one of the things that you shared in there, Jay, was a pretty impressive and encouraging improvement in pace of releases, better focus on measuring success in DevOps, capturing metrics. As we say, you can't improve what you can't measure. Security enhancements. I do still see a gap and shift in stakeholders, but overall, we're seeing a pretty marked improvement in implementation of CI/CD and DevOps and people achieving the benefits. But as this slide says, what we're finding is while those are key to success, they're required to modernize your software and development and delivery. They are not necessarily the end all be all, and things still aren't perfect. So when we talk to some of our customers, and in fact, in this case, a large bank in Canada, and in fact, one of the leading practitioners in Canada. I'd say I spent time with these guys, and they are practically ahead of any bank that I have spoken with in the past decade in terms of implementing DevOps across teams and modernizing practices. And they tell us that while they're doing phenomenally well in implementing DevOps across some 500 plus applications at this point and growing, if they're unable to have better visibility and, as Mitchell alluded to, measure the actual business impact, effectively connecting their software development and delivery to the rest of the organization, despite having strong DevOps practices, they will not be able to remain competitive in the market. Now at CloudBees, we've done some investigation and conducted some interviews to try to drill down and get to the bottom of this statement, as well as just better understand our users, our customers, and the people that are stakeholders in DevOps, or some of the stakeholders in DevOps, right? And we find some interesting things. If we look to the center of the slide, there's still some frustrations and frictions that exist, even in organizations that we see are performing DevOps well. So developers, right? Why am I building this feature? I've been tasked with implementing something, writing code that delivers some capability, hopefully a capability of value to the customer, but I'm not connected to the business enough to have real insight into what the actual customer need is, who asked for it, who is it for. I'm not enabled to use both my technical and creative problem solving skills to develop the right thing, right? Engineering management, which oftentimes would like to spend their time guiding their teams and the organization to the correct technical solution or correct technical decision to meet a customer's needs, end up spending a bunch of time trying to figure out where's my work blocked. What's the problem with this feature that we had slated to be released 2 sprints ago, but it keeps bleeding over? Answering emails, attending meetings, trying to connect their teams to other teams via spreadsheets, etc. Operations, while we've kind of empowered more and more teams to have access to production, we've improved the automation of the handoff from dev to operations and dev to production. Oftentimes, we're still finding that operations teams, shared services, are suffering from a lack of clear visibility into not only what has been delivered, which we're getting better at, but what's next, what's coming later. Basically, where are things in the pipeline? What's the scope of impact on my environment? What's the scope of impact on my customer? So we all kind of in investigating DevOps, obviously first go to talk to the developers, the operations teams, the shared services teams, the QA and engineering management. But what we're also starting to do is look at the concerns of other stakeholders, right? Because the software function alone does not deliver software. or do they do not deliver software alone? Or I liken it to the analogy that if a tree falls in the forest, does it, and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, if I develop a feature and I deliver it to production and no one's there to market it, support it, or aware enough to use it, and it doesn't meet a business need, did I really deliver that software? And I'm going to contend no. So when we go talk to CXOs, we're talking about our chief technical officers, our chief information officers, our chief product officers, right? The question is often, are we delivering what our customers need? Because what I've been tasked with our software being embraced as the core of the business, whether an internal business system, B2B, or B2C, I really need to be able to tell the organization and ensure the organization that we are delivering what the customers of that functionality need. If I'm in product management, I'm continually trying to find out where is a feature in development, tie commits to user stories, ultimately to value and RFEs or requests for enhancements that we've seen. And sales and marketing are always trying to keep up, especially in this continuous world, with what's coming down the pipeline and what are the feature values and benefits of that. And then at the end of the day, when we get software in our customers' hands, if we're considering the user experience, we have other stakeholders like support that need to be able to support it.
There's a lot of things I love about your slide. I wanted to ask you, when you were talking with the people in these roles, did you also have an opportunity to talk with them about maybe what their top 3 measurements or objectives were as part of their function in the organization?
Absolutely. Well, yes, and partially, and no, right? So we did talk to them about sort of their top 3 priorities. We did ask a number of them, how did they measure their CI/CD and DevOps success? And I'd say discouragingly, unlike the 451 report that Jay shared, I didn't see a consistent theme or thread of saying, here's how we know we're doing good. Right, a lot of the developer level team members that we talk to says we're just moving faster and it feels better, right? But what we did ask Mitchell is what are their and really trying to personalize it and get empathetic are what are their top 3 motivators? And what's really interesting about that, especially with developers, which I'd say are at the engine or at least a key component of the engine. Developers, the engine, maybe operations and QA, the drivetrain, and getting this car moving. What developers said is their motivation is they weren't motivated by money. They weren't motivated by status, though people like to be experts. They were motivated by the fact that software development and engineering allowed them to solve people's problems, that there was white space where they can create new things to solve them creatively. And the joy that they got when they saw a user's face or a user's reaction to what they delivered.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And I think all of this sort of highlights how, Brian mentioned the culture. This is sort of a cultural challenge and an enhancement from DevOps, and that is aligning objectives and incentives, right? So that sort of everybody's on the same page in terms of what are we going to do and what's in it for us, right? And if those things can be aligned, if those objectives and incentives can be aligned, you're going to have, I think, less of that cultural friction and, sort of a more collaborative effort. But everyone needs to know what those are. And, it's no small task to align people across, the organization.
If I can share a quick anecdote, Brian, about this. I was just talking with a hardware storage company in the last couple of weeks and talking with different people at different levels of the organization. And when they described their top 3 problems or their top 3 goals, and this wasn't literally the goals on the chart, this is what they saw as what they were focused on. Engineering was very focused on delivery, which because you can would understand efficiency, delivery, effectiveness. That product management, interestingly enough, very interested in how do I actualize the strategy of the company and how do I translate that into product strategy and market. And then third, you can kind of see why is how do you transform from let's just say a hardware to a software type company to operate in a more effective DevOps world. And that came from like a GM type person. So they all fit around a common set of objectives and where the company's heading, but very different parts of the problem that they're trying to solve. And I think I've always, occasionally I'll get asked by technical folks, how do I talk to the C-suite better? And the easiest thing is just go ask them, what are your top 3 things you got to accomplish? And I think that would really be, that's supported by what your slide here says. It shows how different parts of this problem affect different, maybe problems not the right word, but affect different parts of the organization. They're looking at how it helps them with their aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. And I'd love to, when we get some more time, have some more discussion about those findings, because they align with what we're seeing. And again, continuing on the car analogy, right? You have these various pieces that fill a very specialty, and they need to be able to interact together, right? And I think a lot of what we're seeing when the software org connects to the business is what you get when you rev the engine and then you shift from first to second and grind the gears, right? We're trying to get it connected. So even though the engine is functioning and operating as it should, how do we really get the car moving and get it steering in the right direction to achieve our objectives? So what I'd like to share is, the fact that we have motivations and frustration. So great, there's some friction. People aren't happy, but at the end of the day, what does this matter to the business and us as a group? So if we can move to the next slide, I'd like to give a quick example, and we won't go through this in detail, but for people to think about. And of course, I'm the team here to comment on what the impact of this is, right? One, and you alluded to it, Mitchell, market relevance, right? If we are wasting time delivering frequently the wrong thing and not getting feedback to identify that, then we're missing market opportunity. And over time, that will lead to an erosion of market share. And like a number of these things, which you'll probably hear me say again in a minute, that may happen silently, especially if we're not tapped in when we deliver feature X. What are the impressions on that, right? What are the click-throughs to signups, et cetera? Whatever's relevant to the capability that you're delivering, you have to complete the feedback loop. And I am concerned that with DevOps as implemented in a number of places that I've seen, we've lost sight in some places of really establishing a healthy, complete, and useful feedback loop. But rather, hey, we are deploying more frequently. We are seeing the quality of the code go up. But are we actually seeing it being used for what we intended? User experience, right? Again, feedback loop. If we're not delivering a satisfying user experience, and we know, software is eating the world, and in a software-driven environment, customers are key. And today, we have a mindset or attitude where it's very easy to say, if I don't like this capability in a SaaS and mobile world, I just silently delete you or cut off my subscription and move to a competitor, right? Or we find that we just spin our wheels, right? Maybe we're not losing customers, but maybe we're spending money and energy and spinning the engine, not connecting it to the transmission and not driving value. So we need to ensure that we're reducing waste, we're driving business impact. And the one I always like to champion, going back to your question, Mitchell, where I focused on what motivates developers and some of the ICs, is people want to do things that are satisfying. And if they are not truly delivering impact, but rather they're just delivering software faster, at the end of the day, you're probably going to lose key talent. Right?
Everyone wants to be valued, and everyone wants to know that their work matters, right?
Yes. Yes. So if we can go to slide 14 real quick, I want to kind of summarize that what we found, that what we have today that is resulting in these frustrations and frictions that are potentially having a negative impact on the business, even in a world where we're seeing significantly more people perform DevOps well, is that to an extent within the software organization, we still have disconnected teams, people, tools, and process. But even more so when we cut across the organization and look at how the software development organization is connected to some of these other stakeholders that Jay discussed and I presented on the slide, we're even more fragmented and disconnected. There are disparate standalone tools that are not integrated. They have like records or information that are referenced by different keys. I have an opportunity in Salesforce on a phone call that ultimately is related to a Jira ticket. That is a user story that is related to some commits that when it gets delivered, it's in a release and somebody is getting support tickets against that are stored in Zendesk. And that's just a very simple view, right? And today, none of those things are connected. We have to manually work across silos and across tools to connect those things. That's friction. And where we need to be is in a place where we've established, if we can go to the next slide, please, where we're able to establish connectivity and flow, not only across dev, QA, and ops, which we're still improving on, but across the entire stakeholder chain in software development and delivery, right? Where we're functioning as a seamless and connected organism. And to become seamless and connected requires what some of our leaders in our organization, and I thank them for this, have identified as 4 key pillars, right? You first need to establish common data so that all information within and around the software delivery process is captured, stored in a consistent way, and cross-referenced. So you don't have to jump between systems. Once we're able to share data or have common data, the stakeholders in the chain are able to derive and operate against universal insights. While we may have different questions or concerns, right? What are the feature benefits of a feature being delivered for your sales and marketing, right? Versus where are the documents around a feature delivered for our support team versus when are we going to deliver you value X, feature X to customer X for your sales team, right? But if you all look at the same data, you're going to have a universal view within which you can get your specific concern and question answered. Once you do that, we can enable a common connected process. So as we orchestrate software delivery, we are connecting all of the functions together and all of the stakeholders together. At that point, you begin to, as Jay said earlier, begin to unlock the ability, as Jay said, to align, right? And then we get into a place where all functions are collaborating to deliver value, right? You get everybody, dev, QA, ops, sales, marketing, support, and your C-suite, hopefully, moving all in the same direction, having focused energy towards delivering value to the customer and driving business impact. All right. So what this looks like here and what we propose for these 4 pillars is what we call software delivery management, or you'll frequently hear me slip and just abbreviate it and call it SDM, where what we look to do is have connected teams, tools, and process that are focused on driving value. And we can see here sort of a depiction of software delivery management constituting those pillars, right? If we have that common data, we can serve universal insights for all of our stakeholders throughout the processes of identification or planning, research, design, build, test, deploy, release, observe, and support, and more to support that common process and collaboration. So before I move on and talk about CloudBees solution for software delivery management, I'd just like to invite, I'm curious, Jay, Michael, Mitchell, any comments? Questions?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. One of the things I think about and interesting as you go into the CloudBees side of this, if you can talk about, is the great thing about where you are in the market is you're at the intersection where it all comes together. It's that CI/CD process. And any insights, I'm sure our audience is interested in any best practices or learnings. I know you have, I think it's DevOptics is the term that you use, about things that are happening that can be used upstream to learn how to do this better. So would love to hear some thoughts about that, either now or as you kind of get into the solution side of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great ask, and in a couple of slides you'll see a bit of that, and then I'd like to reserve some time so we can actually discuss it. I.e., and to make sure I'm capturing, Mitchell, is with solutions like DevOptics and value stream management, What have we seen or learned that we can share to help people do better to increase their value and velocity, right?
Great.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and move forward to the next slide and extend this picture of software delivery management to share with you what CloudBees solution for SDM looks like. And what CloudBees solution for SDM enables you to do is make sense of all of that previously disconnected teams, tools, and information, and connect it so that you can make sense of it and enable you to surface the context that you need to enable you to build the right thing, which ultimately will excite users, enable you to win customers, and at the end of the day, should be able to truly drive business impact. So if we look at this concept of SDM, before we dig a little further into some screens from our preview project, which Mike may chime in on, one of the key things that we do is we establish this common data via what I like to call a unified system of record, collecting data from your existing enterprise tools while enabling you to use those tools and establishing references to that data, creating linkage, so we then can apply capabilities such as a query and reporting engine across that data, a policy engine to ensure that we're identifying, deriving, sharing, and following certain best practices. The ability to build those practices into a workflow engine, right? Codifying, CI into CD, into DevOps, and ultimately into your software delivery supply chain. And then ultimately being able to use this data to implement machine learning and AI to drive improvement via a recommendations engine, right? To really, truly surface universal insights to derive value from that data.
Yeah, I think, Brian, this sort of highlights how organizations, I think, really are searching for that sort of system of record. And, one is to meet, their often onerous compliance and regulatory requirements to sort of show their work, so to speak. And then the other part of it is, as you referred to, sort of being able to look at their own process and do their own value stream mapping and sort of find the value in DevOps. You don't do it for the sake of doing DevOps. You do it because it's going to make you more competitive and allow you to have better customer experiences and satisfaction. So sort of like you said, codifying that is very important to these organizations, both for the regulatory and compliance requirements that they have, and to sort of internally improve their own processes.
Right. Thanks, Jay. Mike, did you have something to add?
I do, Brian. Just a quick thing here that I want to note that the solution for SDM doesn't replace any of the tools in your DevOps tool chain, right? It actually sits on top as a management orchestration layer, and it takes in data and information from the different tools in an organization's tool chain. So your investment in the tools that you've made doesn't get lost, right? But you're adding this layer on top that really helps digest or ingest all the different data from the different tools into a common domain, so that your cross-functional teams in an organization can then access that information, get the universal insights, and they really understand across the organization what's happening in your software development and delivery process.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. And don't go off of mute yet, because I'm going to need you as we move to the next slide. So if we look at slide 20, I just wanted to give you a quick overview. I think it is really powerful to kind of bring to fruition not only this concept of software delivery management, which is a strategy that is kind of the next step from DevOps, but also show you what the CloudBees solution for software delivery management looks like. And Mike, I'm going to tap you on the next few slides here, but to give you an example or a feel for what can be surfaced, here we're looking at a dashboard that usually would be viewed as an engineering management or project management product management dashboard, where we surface things like product metrics, efficiency metrics, in-process features, progress features, etc. And if we can move to the next slide, where we call out some specific capabilities, and Mike, I'd invite you to talk to these if I'm not throwing you on the spot.
No, I mean, you know, when you look at the CloudBees solution for SDM, it really starts at what we call a product hub or a product overview. And it really is the single dashboard that gives insight and visibility into everything that's happening in your software delivery, what products are being developed, what features are being developed for those products, where they are in the process. Are there PRs that are blocked that need attention? How are different teams doing from a deployment frequency and a quality perspective? It just gives someone like an engineering manager or engineering leader that one single view into the entire software delivery process for all the products that are happening in the organization.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. And if we can go to the next slide. All right, so here we see a feature overview tab, right, which will provide us with all the contextual information to know what I need to know around the feature that I'm developing. And if we can move forward to the next slide, we'll kind of explode out what are some of the key elements, and we'll invite Mike to comment on these as well.
Yeah, again, so this really is, as Brian mentioned, a feature level dashboard that gives just that single place where you can understand where a feature for a particular product is in the process. Again, identifies any blockers that may be hindering that feature from being fully deployed. Also, from a rollout perspective, you can actually start looking at different ways of rolling out that feature, even through A/B testing or a certain percentage of folks that are going to get it, and then understand if there's any impact to the folks who are getting that feature once it's rolled out, and if you need to roll back.
What I'd like to call out on this slide, and you'll see on the earlier slides and on the next slide, is that we're actually doing more than surfacing commits, a commit to production, but actually focusing on the problem and the things that constitute that. So on the right, you'll see a problem statement. I can't create and play a selection of songs matching my activity or mood, right? Versus getting a mandate or directive on how to solve an issue and then tracking the commit that is supposed to solve it. The whole team is surfacing the value that they're supposed to be delivering or that we're expecting to deliver. So if we can move to the next slide. What we see here is an efficiency dashboard that allows us to not only capture value stream metrics, but look at where our energy is focused via contribution graph. And we can go to the following slide, which again explodes some of this out. And I'll go ahead and speak a bit to it. And then Mike, please follow up, right? As we've talked about multiple times around value stream, you can see a component around value stream velocity, going all the way from feature branches to pull requests, build and test, integration, security scans, etc. So we're taking a holistic view on the delivery process. A contribution graph, which highlights the features or value that we're supposed to be delivering, and over time what the relative contribution of those were. And then before I give it to Mike to talk about DevOps Index and the DORA metrics, what I find really compelling to call out is on the right-hand side, a recommendations engine, right? That is looking at the activity and data. And here it's making a recommendation that says there's a high number of pull requests open and not reviewed for more than 24 hours. So it recommends that you add a policy to avoid that. And you see a button that just you click and say add product policy. Mike, can you go ahead and fill this out here?
Yeah, again, related to efficiency, front and center really are what we call the DORA metrics, right? So the 4 key metrics around DevOps, efficient velocity and stability. So deployment frequency, mean lead time to recover, and change failure rate. And that's front and center. And that allows someone, again, like an engineering manager, to understand how different teams are performing. And for higher level, higher performing teams, what are they doing from a best practices perspective that they can, that manager can then kind of bring down to the other teams so that everyone is working as efficiently as possible to create better software faster. I also want to point out too that here you can actually implement policies around improvement, or so that you can actually enforce certain elements that the teams need to do in order to make sure that you're meeting improvement goals over time.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. And with that, I know we're pushing for time, so if we can go ahead and jump to the next slide. We'll call out some actions that you can take and then take some questions, I believe, Mitchell. So if you're interested in software delivery management and you want to learn more, you can sign up for our preview program to potentially be a preview partner at next.cloudbees.com/join. There are also links here to learn more about software delivery management, download the white paper, and links to the blogs, which you'll receive as follow-up to this webinar. So thanks. I think over to you now, Mitchell.
Great, great. We've got some real great questions here from the audience. First question, while we're talking about the CloudBees solution, is the CloudBees solution require an outside group to use this? Who's typically implementing this and using this particular tool? Is it the DevOps team? Is it the project management, combination of folks? Who's the best audience that's going to both implement and consume this information?
Do you want to take that, Mike?
Yeah, let me start, and Brian, you can jump in if you want. I think initially it's going to be focused on the engineering team and the dev and ops teams as well, based on when we come out with initial GA. But eventually, it really is meant for the cross-functional teams in an organization to be able to use, right? So by not only ingesting data from the tools in a DevOps tool chain, but also from other tools such as Zendesk, such as Salesforce, maybe even such as things like Pardot, where anyone in their organization can then go in, understand what's happening in the product delivery or the delivery cycle of a product or a feature, and then be able to measure and manage how that's impacting not only customers, but then get the outcomes for the business. So you're actually measuring business value as it relates to customer engagement.
Exactly. Can you say some more about that, Brian? Because I think that's an extremely important part of your product, about tying back to what we were saying earlier of the business metrics or the business value.
Yeah, and so I'll segue off of that question. You know, with the ingestion of the data and integration to the other tools, there's an expectation that while the business stakeholders operate in their tool of function, and they can leverage SDM, but as they operate in their tool of function, like Salesforce, that is being ingested and correlated back to the related software delivery capabilities, which then allows us to surface a key contributor to identifying what the intended or expected business value was, and then measuring it. And as we've talked about, as you brought up, Mitchell, we go back to the slides Jay covered. Right, and it was so encouraging or important that business metrics were showing up second, because not only is it business metrics that enable you to prove the success of DevOps and grow it, but it is positive movement against business metrics and impact that enable the software development organization to get the stake involvement and support that they need to continue to help the business do better. So again, we talk about feedback loops, right? SDM and the integration is really about expanding that feedback loop beyond just commit to production, but rather ideation to use to measurement.
Very good. Just to let our audience know, we're probably going to go a few minutes past the hour, but not too long. I think it's one just note to add to what you said, Brian. It came up earlier about kind of shifting to ROI value, and it seems like what you're doing with CloudBees is perfectly suited to be right in that place, as opposed to only efficiency. So kudos.
Yeah, that's great.
It's a problem we're all trying to solve.
Jay had a clever one that I may steal from you, Jay, right? Moving from TCO to ROI. Instead of measuring cost of ownership being a cost center, moving to ROI to really clearly being a profit center. Right, Jay?
Yeah, exactly. It's about, showing what gains you can get from DevOps beyond speed, right? And as the stakeholders, as we see more top-down adoption, that is bringing with it more interest in that sort of business case for DevOps, which is a good thing.
Awesome.
Great. If I can throw a question, kind of a combination of question to you, Jay, from several of our audience members. There's a lot of interest in the metrics that you had in your slide, or how do you measure effectiveness? Is there any efforts to establish some kind of a baseline or a benchmark for the industry? You know, IT organizations are always looking to how am I doing compared to others? Is there some benchmark I can use? What's the state of the art today, and kind of where you see happening moving forward, and are there resources people can go to find out more?
Yeah, well, I think you guys have referred to sort of some of the DORA research and findings, and you know, I don't think that's probably as close as we have to industry standards for DevOps. I mean, DevOps is still a somewhat nebulous terms and can mean different things to different folks, and there is no standard DevOps tool chain. Right, I often say DevOps is not a tool chain; it's a toolbox. And if you think sort of about a plumber going to to a job, they have all kinds of different tools. They have to have their expertise to use the right ones. And in each case, you know, each job's going to be a little bit different. But again, I'd refer back to some of those DORA metrics and benchmarks, I think, that are emerging as sort of industry standards on you know, where you need to be going with DevOps.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
Dave, I'll jump in here too. Just, you know, DORA, they've been doing their annual survey. I think this is their 6th or 7th year, and they really are becoming, as you say, the industry standard out there, not only in those 4 key metrics, but just how they're rating the different companies out there and how they're performing in DevOps across all industries and what their findings really are. So I concur that they are probably the best place to start as far as benchmarking.
Great, excellent, thank you. If I can wrap up with one last question. One audience member, Rick, is asking about kind of how do you get started in this? You know, a lot of the information we're presenting is from folks doing DevOps already. And that's also who you were talking about that you were surveying. What's the place to get started? Do you do it one step at a time, or one piece at a time, or take on big chunks of it? What have you seen people do effectively?
I'm going to say absolutely and emphatically, incrementally. I always say, you know, get started. Yes, you can do some planning and a sketch of kind of where you want to go. What I always say is determine where you are, determine where you want to get, then you can start to figure out how to get there, but do it iteratively, right, with adaptive route planning. Now, when we talk about we're implementing DevOps, but we realize that we need to connect to our larger organization and do better, what I say is first sign up for the CloudBees SDM preview program, right? So you can start to get a picture of it, but then also start to go talk to the business, ask the business, some of the stakeholders that we called out. Where do you see pain points? What do you see as delivering value? Try to figure out how to automate measurement of those, and start to develop kind of your own initial version of those universal insights that you can then call people in to collaborate around. And then the second is build relationships. We oftentimes talk about the business learning how to speak tech, right? We as people in the software development function need to begin to reach out and learn how to talk business.
I totally agree with that. It's a lot easier.
Yeah.
I think it's easier for us to learn that oftentimes for others to learn the tech side of it.
Yeah, I would add, I'd sort of build on that. Incrementally, I think is very good advice. And I'd say start small and start new. It makes sense to start with a new application that you don't have to bring all that baggage with the existing infrastructure and things. And the point is, a big part of DevOps is to just initiate it. Just start it. A lot of times you hear, don't be afraid to fail. And that's a pretty dramatic departure from the stability and command and control that central IT is used to. So, you know, it's a bit of a cold pond, but once you get in, the water's fine. And I think, you know, as organizations iterate, as they leverage an effective feedback loop, you're going to be able to improve. But it does help, I think, to start small and to start with a new application so that it's less of a fight, I think.
And the good news is you're not alone. There's a lot of folks who are already in that pond that can help you out. And CloudBees and 451 Research being two great examples of that. Well, with that, let's wrap things up. I want to thank you, Jay and Brian and Michael, all three of you, for your contributions and expertise. The questions were fantastic and appreciate your responses to that. Just a reminder to our audience, the webinar recording and slides are going to be available via an email sent to you, and then in a separate email, we'll be sending a link to an ebook that's got some fascinating information in it as well. Be sure to check out devops.com for other upcoming webinars. I'd like to thank our guests today, our speakers, Jay Lyman, who's Principal Analyst at 451 Research, Brian Dawson, who's DevOps Evangelist and Analyst at CloudBees, and Michael Baldani, Senior Product Marketing Manager at CloudBees. I did an informal poll of myself, and I picked Michael as the winner of the Analyst because he's got the captain's chair from the enterprise.
I was going to say, thank goodness we didn't get to that poll.
Yeah, well, I pulled an audible for you. So thanks everyone for joining us, and thank you for CloudBees for sponsoring today's webinar.
Thanks.
Have a great day. Be careful out there.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.